Quick video on doing the front brakes on a Niva, including replacing the discs, the pads, and also the calipers, and also fitting new hoses. I'll try and make it as quick as I can, but there's a lot of information and detail in this video, so it might even become a 2-episode video. We'll see. All right. Hope you enjoy. New front hoses, discs, new calipers, brand new calipers, pads, and then it come with a bottle of brake fluid. I won't be using this, I'll be using good quality comma stuff. And then some pins, springs, and all that shenanigans. So I've already got the battery disconnected. First thing you do when you start working on a car is disconnect the battery. I have had a fire on this actual car, on this Niva, because I was replacing my steering box, and because I was incredibly lazy, didn't disconnect the battery. And then as I was pulling the steering box out, it caught on the starter motor wires, and yeah, it set on fire, so I had to replace a lot of the wiring, put it out with a fire extinguisher, mad panic and all that sort of stuff. So always disconnect your battery no matter what you're doing. Lesson learned. It's just a 10mm spanner on a Niva, and then the wheels I've already undone as well. On yours it's more likely to be a 19, mine are aftermarket wheel nuts and they're 17s for some reason. They are an M12 stud, so they should be 19, but anyway. Right, so the main problem I'm having with my brakes, well, essentially the only problem I have with my brakes is they drag, and they drag really badly. They've dragged ever since I've had this. I mean, that at the moment, I should be able to grab all of that, spin it, and it should just keep spinning eternally until it slows down, obviously. It shouldn't need me to push it around. And this provides several problems. Number one, power. It's not the most powerful car in the world. So as soon as you hit a hill, it just starts slowing down again. Number two, it consumes brake pads. I mean, these have only been on a year. So, you know, then it just costs money in fuel as well. You know, it consumes fuel. Your brake discs are wearing down. You put extra heat into your bearings on your hubs. It can deteriorate the grease. And more importantly, if it gets really bad, what can happen is it can boil your brake fluid, and essentially you'll have no brakes on the front axle. This hasn't ever got this bad, luckily. So this is why I'm quite desperate to get the brakes done, really. Alright, so they're really low. You can see this is the piston that's seizing because it's pushing it in closer at the top. The bottom two pistons aren't a problem, but the top piston is the issue. Right, so the first thing we're going to do is just take these pins out of here. You'll probably need a side cutters, that's what I generally use. This has got a split pin in it because it had it when I first got it. It should be a little R-clip like this. Should be a little R-clip just like that. But split pins work perfectly fine for them. Put that out with a hammer. When you take these like horseshoe almost things off, just be careful. There's some springs behind here that put tension on the clamp. Just be careful because they'll fall out potentially. Okay, so these are the springs just here. Those two there. Hopefully, I think the kit's got new springs in it. These are like a sliding caliper, but they're a really good system for an off-road vehicle for a sliding caliper, because they're not got the rods. Generally, sliding calipers start to seize on the rods, and then they only wear on the piston side. They don't wear on the actual pad side. So they're a really good solution, because normally sliding calipers aren't good for off-roading because they get filled up with dirt and mud. Whereas these shoes, the way they clamp down, they allow movement, and any dirt and mud is vibrated out of them. So they're, like I say, as far as sliding calipers go anyway, I mean, you can't really beat piston caliper. But piston calipers are obviously more expensive. So normally what you'd do is you just get your caliper and you tie it up out of the way if you're not going to be replacing your caliper or your hoses. Because I'm going to be replacing both the caliper and the hose, I'm just going to snip them. But first, I'm just going to line up my hoses, make sure that I'm happy with the length of my new hoses. That's fine. That one's good as well. Obviously, when we cut this, we're going to get a lot of brake fluid come out of it. It's a good idea to have a set of mole grips, or you can get proper hose clips for brake lines. Okay, so just pull them out, tuck them out of the way, and the caliper will just come off. Better than I have done. Alright, the next thing we need to do is just take the caliper, the caliper carrier off, so that we can get the disc off. It's a 17. If these are exceptionally tight, what you should do is you should really sort of do like a quarter of a turn, and then tighten it back up, and then half a turn, tighten it back up a quarter, and then half a turn again, and just keep wiggling it backwards and forwards, just to try and stop the bolt from shearing in the actual carrier itself. Got to undo the dirt shield as well. And then it's a 17 spanner at the bottom. There is some tabs that you've just got to flatten out. Just a safety tab on the back of the 17 that you've got to flatten out before you can undo it on the lower one. Okay, so two 17s and a little 10mm dirt shield comes off, and then the caliper carrier. So next we've got to take the disc off, which you just use a big pry bar on. Generally I get away with this one, but might be a bit of a bally. There we go. Take that cap off. So it's just a small centre punch, nice and fine, just so you can get it between the keyway and the nut. And just tap it in there, straighten it out. If you don't do that, what happens is when you undo it, it just shears it off. And then if you have to reuse this nut when you're tying it up, there won't be any metal there for you to punch down into the keyway. Alright, so you got to make sure you got your handbrake on, 4-wheel drive and diff locking. And then just knock it loose. I'd recommend if you're doing this, get yourself a new nut. You might as well, for the cost of them, just get a new nut. And then in theory, this should pull off now. Yes, it does. Good. Sometimes what happens is if the bearing's in particularly bad condition in the hub, it can collapse and these can actually nip on, and the hub can actually nip in, and then they're quite a pig to get out. You just have to force them out then, really. Sometimes you have to press them out. You have to take the actual hub carrier off and press these out. And I'll give the hub face a nice clean. Check your seals. I would recommend, I'm not going to do this today because I'm going to have this stripped down again soon, because I'm going to be fitting my new wishbones with the new bushes. But I would recommend that if you're doing your brakes, replacing your brake discs, I would replace the bearings at the same time, because bearings form almost like a groove as they're operating. And as soon as you undo this nut and then retying it back up again, it can actually it very rarely finds its natural seat again, and it wears down very fast. So I would recommend that you replace your bearings at the same time as doing your brakes, just to save you having to strip it down again in the future for the cost of them. Right, so we've got our disc off. That's your hub, spigot, whatever. Just got our disc off. You can do this in 2 ways now. So what we've got to do is we've got to punch these studs out, the wheel studs, because that's how the disc is held on the Niva. And you can do it with a drift and a hammer, but I prefer to use a copper knocker, literally just because it protects the threads. It stops the threads getting damaged. That's literally just it. You just keep tapping them out. Don't take much. Simple as that. Be aware of where the studs fall once you've knocked them out. What you can do is you can put the actual wheel nut on. If you're worried about damaging the thread, you can put the actual wheel nut on and use that to protect the thread. Really, it shouldn't be an issue if you're using the copper knocker. There we go. Yeah, that's all it takes. Not much at all. What I'll do is I'll just get the wire wheel on this, just wire brush this surface off, make sure it's nice and clean, make sure there's no debris left there before we assemble it all back together. Any debris, what it'll do is it'll just make that disc sit slightly off, and it'll give you that pulsing or warped disc feeling if you press your brakes hard. Right, so I've got I've wire wheeled the face that the disc mates to, and I've just put a very light coating of copper grease. And what that does is, number one, it makes it easy to get off in the future, but the second thing is it stops any rust building up in between and actually pressing these apart, and again causing the like the distorted brake disc feeling. And I've also just wire wheeled these studs up as well, make it so it's nice and clean and all assembles correctly. The copper grease, I know it looks like I've got a lot on there, but I've actually got just a very fine coating. You don't want too much, because obviously when grease gets hot, it becomes very thin, almost oil-like, and you don't want it to come out and get all over your brake discs, and essentially, you know, you've just got oil all over your brake discs, basically. So you really do just, if you don't have to do it, you know, it's just, if you do, very light coat. Now normally at this stage I'd probably take it over to the press and press these studs in, but due to the fact that I can't be bothered moving the camera, I'm just going to use a drift and drift them in. You just sit them in there just to, I put all five in at the same time, just to help alignment, make sure it is all lined up. This flat spot goes to the outside, stops it rotating when you're doing up your wheel nuts and undoing them. I'll just go get a drift. So what I do is I open the jaw of the vise right up so that it's the same width as the wheel studs. So if you put it in like that, your wheel studs sit just inside of the jaws. And what that does is it gives us a nice solid surface to drift these down into. So I'm just using the same copper knocker I used to knock them out, and a bit of round bar. And then they just knock in. Usual rules apply. It's a good idea to do the opposites. Don't be worried about breaking them. Just gotta make sure you don't damage the threads, which the chances are very little. And then just eyeball that gap. Just make sure. What you got to remember is, you know, I mean, there's no gap there, but as you pull, as you fit your wheel and you're tying it up, what this does is it actually pulls the brake disc into the hub. So, you know, it's not essential that you get these stamped all the way in. It'll do it itself naturally. That one there just wants a little bit more. There you go, that's it. One new brake disc. Alright, so we've got our kaput caliper. Just a 10mm. Be careful with these because this is aluminium. This casing's aluminium. The carrier is steel and the bolt is steel. And what happens with when you put aluminium and steels together is electrolysis. So you get something like so you get an electrolyte, such as a classic one for cars is salt water, and what happens is it chemically reacts, and basically a lot of corrosion starts to happen. It's not a good idea, generally speaking, to mix steels and aluminiums together. So you just got to be careful when you undo this this stud, this bolt. So I'm just going to use the 1/4 inch. That's a 13 or an 11 looking at it. Right, so that's an 11mm. I'm just going to use a 1/4 inch because I don't want it to snap. Okay, and then I'm just going to use the same principle I was showing earlier on, where I don't go too far, I just work it out gradually.
And you get a feel for it eventually. You can feel when it just feels a bit too much pressure to be putting behind it. Sometimes they do snap anyway. And you've got to drill them out, which isn't ideal, but these things happen. There we go, that's better. She's going now. Alright, so that's that out. And then this should just knock out, he says. This is essentially what I was on about with electrolysis. The two have just corroded and fused together. It just takes a bit of persuasion to get them to split. She's going. There we go. So like that white powdery stuff just in that groove there, that's because of electrolysis essentially. Put a wire brush on it, it'd be alright. There, that's a good example there. So that, don't know if it's really getting a good clear shot for you, but that's a classic example of what happens when you put carbon steels next to aluminium, and the different metals have different reaction rates of it, but steel and aluminium are quite bad for it. Again, I'm just going to clean this runner in here. I might clean the whole thing off, but I'm not going to paint it. I don't have time, so I probably won't bother. I'll probably just clean these runners out, make sure it's all free moving and whatnot. Alright, so we've got that nice and cleaned up in there now. We'll put that to the side for now. Then what we've got these little this little spring and a little I don't know what you call that really, plunger, something like that. What that does, spring goes into the hole, so this is where your bolt sits that we took out earlier on. So your spring goes in there, and then the plunger goes with the point facing the bolt head, the bolt thread, and it just sits in there like that. Simple as that. And then you take your caliper. You got to make sure that you get these in square as you can, because they are snug. don't know if you can see that, but you can just see that plunger in the bottom of that threaded hole. Some people would say that to put Loctite on this, but really that plunger there is going to stop it. If this winds out, the plunger is going to stop it from coming out anyway. But the other thing is, like we've already found out, this being aluminium, the electrolysis will hold it in predominantly anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to use copper grease, I'm not going to use anything, I'm just going to thread it in there as is. It's got a spring washer on it. Should be alright. If you want to put Loctite on it, that's up to you. Alright. One caliper assembled, ready to be fitted. Very nice. That's that for that one. In the next one we'll be reassembling it, including fitting the calipers, the discs and the brake hoses. If you want more videos about Niva tutorials, Niva, I don't know, how-tos, how I do them anyway, just like, comment, subscribe. It's appreciated. Cheers for now. See you in the next one.